The rain was unforgiving. That night, the downpour was so thick and heavy that even the street lights seemed to blow. Josiah Caleb, a 35-year-old tech billionaire and founder of Caleb Solutions Group, gripped the steering wheel of his newly acquired black Bentley with unusual tension. He wasn't supposed to be driving, his driver had insisted. His security team had warned, but Josiah needed space to clear his head that night. His wife, Fatima, had been distant for weeks. Arguments had become a routine. Her silence was louder than her anger. The pressure of fame, business expansion, and now marital strain sat heavy on his chest. So he drove alone that night. And then it happened. A trailer skidded across the steep road from nowhere, out of control. Lights blinding, Josiah had barely a second to react before metal twisted, glass shattered, and darkness consumed him. 3 weeks later, Josiah woke up in a private hospital room, tubes, machines, pain, and the beeping of the machines. But worse than the physical pain was the diagnosis: paralysis from the waist down. Doctors called it incomplete spinal trauma. There was a chance he might recover, but no one could promise anything. For now, he was confined to a wheelchair. His wife, Fatima, was by his side when he woke up. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes puffy. She held his hand and whispered, "You'll get through this, Josiah. I'm not going anywhere." But her warmth didn't last. Back at their Banana Island mansion, reality settled in. Josiah noticed the change. Fatima stopped sitting with him during therapy. She started traveling again, vague business trips that lasted days. He heard her laughter late at night, not with him, but on a video phone call with someone named Isaiah, a younger man with a personal trainer's build and a sleek smile. And these constant calls became too often, and too many random visits with no explanation in his own house. And then there was the late night whisper Josiah wasn't meant to hear. If only he didn't survive. It echoed in his mind like a curse. Josiah's heart broke slowly. He tried to comfort her once. She smiled and said, "You overthink things, Josiah." But the look in her eyes told a different story, and he knew it right there. But he needed more evidence to put a valid tape on what he was suspecting. Then came Maria. Maria was barely 23, soft-spoken with a quiet presence that entered the house long before her voice ever did. She wasn't just hired by chance. It was Fatima who had requested her through a friend in her business circle. With her growing number of work trips and social engagements, Fatima complained she couldn't be expected to cook or clean constantly, while also managing Josiah's condition. "I need someone who won't ask questions and will just do the work," she told her friend. And so, Maria arrived. An orphan since the age of 10, Maria had no family, no connections, only a reputation among employers as quiet, loyal, and shockingly efficient. She had worked her way up through jobs no one else wanted. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it was genuine. There was a strength in her silence, a quiet resilience that seemed carved into her bones. She didn't flinch at Josiah's condition. She greeted him with respect. She cleaned without complaint. She brought him tea and always checked the temperature before handing it over. And slowly, day by day, she started doing more than just her job. She started caring, and Josiah noticed. Maria was very easygoing, respectful, and moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had known struggle. She showed Josiah deep care, always gentle with his fragile body, never once recoiling or showing pity. She wiped his mouth when he couldn't do it himself. She spoke to him with eye contact, never raising her voice, never rushing, and with time, Josiah trusted her. But Fatima noticed the growing trust. She watched silently as Josiah began asking for Maria's help more than anyone else's. And in that shift, Fatima saw the perfect opportunity to launch her final blow. It had been her plan all along. Maria was never hired just for convenience. Fatima had picked her for one reason. She needed someone naive, helpless, someone easily disposable, someone who would take the fall. She had promised Isaiah this would be quick and clean. And now that Caleb trusted Maria completely, Fatima knew it was time. Every morning, she began preparing a special tea, a toxic blend maxed under herbal scents. She made Maria serve it to Josiah, always insisting, "Persuade him to take it." He needs to get stronger. Maria would do just that, and moments after drinking it, Josiah would slip into long hours of weakness. His muscles would give out, his eyes dulled, he would be unresponsive. And that's when Fatima made her move. She would manipulate documents, redirect funds from offshore accounts, and call Isaiah to discuss progress. At times, she would insult Josiah in front of staff, slap his face, pour water on him in his wheelchair, mocking him openly. Haggle, frustration, push him until he filed for a divorce himself. There were days she starved him, ordering no one in the house to feed him. This continued for weeks, until one fateful Thursday morning, Maria, carrying a now familiar tea, accidentally spilled the cup in the kitchen. What followed shocked her. Fatima erupted. "You foolish girl! Do you know how expensive that tea is? It is not ordinary," she screamed, slapping Maria across the face. Maria, trembling, began apologizing. "I'll make a fresh cup immediately." But Fatima was pacing madly now, muttering, "My success, my final success." Then she picked up her phone and dialed. Maria stood there unnoticed, listening. "He missed the last dose," Fatima whispered into the receiver. That phrase stuck. Last dose. A few hours later, Josiah stirred. His speech returned. He moved. The fog was gone. It all made sense to Maria now. She whispered to herself, "I know what to do." 3 days later, Fatima left on another one of her unexplained business trips. Maria went to Josiah's room and told him everything. At first, he shouted at her, disbelief, betrayal, and then confusion. But then she explained every detail. The tea, the doses, the way Fatima reacted after the spill, the phone call. Josiah sat silently, and slowly it all clicked. They set the game in motion. The next day, Fatima returned. She brewed the tea herself and handed it to Maria, and said coldly, "Be careful this time. Don't throw it away like the last time, and make sure he takes it. It is very important, okay?" Maria nodded. But instead of delivering the poison tea, she brewed a fresh batch herself. Josiah drank it and pretended to fall under the sedative spell, unmoving and blank. Fatima began speaking on the phone, assuming he was incapacitated. Maria listened in from the corridor as Fatima whispered to Isaiah about final ownership transfers, a fake death certificate, and a new life abroad. Josiah had heard it all. The trap was set, and now Maria wasn't just a maid. She was the only hope Josiah had left in that house, and she wasn't going to feel him again. One afternoon, after she had helped him reposition his legs during therapy, he asked, "Why are you so kind?" Maria looked him in the eye. "Because I know what it means to be forgotten, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way." That night, Josiah wept, not from pain, but from the weight of being seen. The mansion had one other silent observer, Mr. Johnson, a 56-year-old head housekeeper, loyal to the Calebs for over a decade. Mr. Johnson had seen the rise and fall of people behind the scenes. He saw Fatima change from a doting housewife to cold stranger. He noticed Isaiah's frequent visits, and he heard things others pretended not to hear. But Johnson didn't speak. He watched, and he waited. Until one morning, he found powdery residue at the bottom of Josiah's untouched tea. He smelt it. It didn't look like something he had ever seen or smelled in all his years of experience. He didn't say a word. Instead, he unknowingly brought it to Josiah, wanting to know whether it was part of his drugs and why was it grounded to powder. That was the moment Josiah sniffed from the victim to strategist. He called for hidden cameras to be installed across the mansion, in the hallways, the kitchen, the guest room Fatima had converted into Isaiah's wellness space. The footage was damning. Fatima and Isaiah weren't just having an affair. They were plotting something worse. One recording captured Fatima's voice whispering, "He's deteriorating. One more dose and the wheel is mine." Isaiah laughed. "Let the tea do the talking." Josiah sat in silence for an hour after hearing that. Then he called Mr. Johnson, a loyal servant of his house, the only person who could rely on at the moment. "Prepare a report and call a lawyer." "Do it quietly, Johnson," he said, with fear gripping down his tone. Mr. Johnson nodded once. Yes, sir. Maria had noticed Josiah's increasing silence. One night, she found him staring out the window, tears in his eyes. She reached for his hand. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone. He gripped her hand. You are the only reason I haven't collapsed. They said nothing else. A week later, the arrests were made. Fatima and Isaiah were taken in for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted poisoning. The media had a field day. The once envied power couple had crumbled. Through it all, Maria stood by Josiah's side. She attended the hearings. She shielded him from the paparazzi. She wiped his face when the cameras left. But there was still one truth she didn't know. Josiah hadn't just recovered. He'd been walking again for nearly 2 weeks. And tonight, he would show her. In the garden, under soft evening light, he asked her to wheel him out. Halfway through the path, he stood. Maria froze, cleaned her eyes to see if she wasn't dreaming. You can walk, Mr. Caleb. He nodded. Yes, I can walk. I need to know who really loved me. The man, not the money. Tears streamed down her face. He knelt. Maria, you saved me. Not just my life, but my soul. Will you let me spend the rest of it proving that to you? She covered her mouth in shock and disbelief. Yes, I will. And the man who had once lost everything, wealth, movement, hope, he stood again, because someone believed he could. The Caleb mansion had become quieter in the days following Fatima's and Isaiah's rest. But the silence wasn't peaceful, it was dense, like the air before a thunderstorm. News vans had camped outside the gates for 2 days straight. Their reporters desperate to catch a glimpse of Isaiah or the mysterious housemaid who had stood by him during the scandal. Maria stayed inside, away from the windows. She did not like attention, and she certainly didn't know how to navigate fame, even by association. She tried to keep to herself, but Josiah wouldn't let her. Each morning, he asked for her by name. Each afternoon, she sat by him on the veranda while he read documents or scrolled through his phone. Each evening, they shared tea. To an outsider, they might have looked like a couple suspended in a quiet love story, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that there was something left unsaid. Why did you stay? Josiah asked one day, his voice low. She paused. Because you didn't deserve to be abandoned, even after everything. You weren't the one poisoning anyone. He nodded thoughtfully. But you didn't know that for sure, did you? She turned to him. I knew who you were by how you treated people who had nothing to offer you. He did not respond right away. Instead, he reached out and gently covered her hand with his. You're not just a maid, Maria. She looked down. I never thought I was. Meanwhile, the investigation intensified. With mounting evidence from Josiah's internal recordings and Johnson's testimony, the state began formal prosecution. Isaiah had confessed under pressure, blaming Fatima for masterminding the poisoning. But Fatima had a different strategy: denial and deflection. My husband has always been paranoid, she always told her lawyer. He probably faked all this to get sympathy and humiliate me. But the digital forensics said otherwise. The footage was real. The poison traces in Josiah's bloodstream were documented, and the private audio messages between Fatima and Isaiah, recovered from a backup phone, left no room for spin. Still, Fatima's legal team tried to stall the process, filing injunctions, requesting mental evaluations, and trying to paint Josiah as emotionally unstable. Back at the mansion, Josiah was preparing his own counterattack. He hadn't just installed cameras, he had hired private investigators long before the poisoning. What they found now, months later, was deeper than he expected. Fatima hadn't just cheated, she had diverted funds from his tech firm to a dummy account under a shell corporation. One Isaiah controlled, millions in hush money, luxury purchases, and bribes traced back to accounts she managed. It wasn't just betrayal, it was grand theft. Josiah called a meeting. Maria, Johnson, his lawyer, and his CFO attended. We are not just pressing criminal charges, he said. We're going after everything. Her shares, her reputation, and that account. But won't that drag us through the mud for another year? The lawyer asked. Josiah nodded. Yes, but that's where I want it, in the mud. So she can't pretend she never stood on a clean ground. Maria said nothing, but her hand never left his arm. Days later, Josiah stood before a private judge with Maria, sitting quietly in the gallery. I'm here to reclaim what was stolen. Not just my money, but my peace, he said. And to prove that even when your body is broken, your will can still fight back. It was powerful. It made headlines. Maria avoided the cameras once again, but people were noticing her. Who was this girl who never left his side? And why did Josiah look at her like she was the one thing that still made him feel whole? One evening, Maria came to say goodnight as usual. He stopped her at the door. Stay. She turned. Josiah, please, just for a minute. She walked back and sat beside him. He leaned his head on her shoulder. I don't know what happens next, he whispered, but I don't want to face it without you. She swallowed hard. Then you won't have to. He looked up. Promise? I've never broken one before. And just like that, something unspoken became undeniable. Not a confession, but a beginning. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, influencers, even a few curious politicians had shown up. The fall of the Calebs, once Nigeria's most enviable power couple, had become a national spectacle. Everyone wanted to know if the whispers were true. Had Fatima really tried to kill her husband? Was Josiah faking the paralysis? And who was the quiet girl by his side? Josiah sat in his wheelchair not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The truth would come, but on his terms. Maria sat directly behind him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The prosecution laid everything bare: the surveillance footage, the toxicology reports, the money trails. They showed Fatima slipping crushed pills into Josiah's tea. They played recordings of her whispering with Isaiah discussing inheritance clauses. They presented bank statements showing millions funneled into secret accounts. Fatima sat stone-faced. Her lawyers argued the tapes were doctored, the voice recordings inconclusive. She's being framed, her head counsel said, by a paranoid man trying to cover his mental collapse. Josiah didn't flinch. When it was his turn to speak, he rolled forward. I was broken, not just physically, but emotionally. My wife, the woman I vowed to protect, abandoned me at my lowest. She fed me poison and smiled while doing it. I have witnesses, evidence, and a heart that remembers what it feels like to die a little more each day under her care. The courtroom was silent. Except for a single sob from Maria, the defense tried to pivot. They leaked private messages between Josiah and Maria, claiming the two had begun a relationship while he was still married. Emotional infidelity, they called it, but the public wasn't buying it. Maria's composure, her loyalty, her visible humility struck a chord. Even the judge asked gently, Miss Maria, why did you stay? She answered without pause, because I saw someone worth saving outside the courtroom. Reactions were divided. Some still supported Fatima, saying she was trapped in a loveless marriage with a controlling man. Others saw her as the villain, a socialite who gambled with love and lost everything. What no one expected was what came next. Halfway through the trial, Isaiah flipped. He turned state witness. He told me she said the will was already signed, that we just needed to be patient, that he was dying anyway, so why wait? He showed emails, secret recordings of their private arguments. She used me, he admitted, but I went along with it. It was a fatal blow to the defense. Fatima's team tried to settle. Josiah refused. 2 weeks later, the judge rendered her decision. Fatima Caleb and Isaiah Thomas were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted poisoning, fraud, and will manipulation, sentencing to follow. Gasps filled the room. Fatima collapsed into her chair, makeup stricken, dignity cracked. Josiah turned to Maria. It's over. But she didn't smile, because she knew something he didn't. A former friend of Maria's had been paid to dig up dirt. She sold a fake story to the tabloids that Maria had targeted Josiah from the beginning, that she'd worked in the Caleb mansion before under another name, that she had stolen from a former employer. It was all false, but the damage was real. Maria disappeared from the media. She stopped answering her phone, stopped coming to court. Josiah was frantic. Where is she? Johnson shook his head. She packed a small bag, said she needed air. But she's innocent, Josiah snapped. Doesn't matter, Johnson said softly. Sometimes even the innocent bleed when the world wants a scapegoat. That night, Josiah made a choice. He went live on Instagram, no PR team, no filters, just him in a plain room speaking directly to the people. You watched me fall. Now you want to question the one person who lifted me. Let me be clear. Maria is not the villain. She's the only reason I'm alive. If loving her is a crime, then lock me up next. It was raw and it worked. The next morning, Maria returned, quietly, without makeup, without apology. And Josiah met her at the gate, fell to his knees and whispered, "Don't ever disappear again." She hugged him so tightly the world melted away. And for the first time, the press cheered. 3 months had passed since the trial. Fatima was serving a 15-year sentence at Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison. Isaiah received 10 years with the possibility of parole. Their once glamorous lives had crumbled into obscurity, and the Caleb name, once synonymous with prestige, had become a cautionary tale of betrayal and deception. But for Josiah and Maria, life was slowly rebuilding itself, not on headlines or grand gestures, but on quiet mornings, shared prayers, and healing routines. The mansion had changed. Gone were the cold marble statues and the high-gloss furnitures. Real homes grow things, she said. Let's grow something good again. Maria insisted on plants and light warmth, and so they did. Josiah stepped away from the public eye. He dissolved his position at Caleb Solutions and created a new foundation focused on spinal injury rehabilitation and domestic abuse recovery. Maria didn't just support it, she helped design the programs. She spoke at private gatherings, shared her story, advocated for dignity in invisible roles, maids, caregivers, forgotten workers who kept Nigeria running. People listened because her voice carried truth. One morning over breakfast, Josiah pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Maria stared. "Josiah, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "I've known love, but I've never known peace until you." He opened the box, a simple gold ring engraved with one word inside, "Sin." Maria said yes with her whole chest, and wedding was small. A courtyard ceremony with white linen, soft music, and no paparazzi. Johnson was the best man. Zainab, Josiah's cousin, walked Maria down the aisle. The vows were quiet, deep, and very personal. "I don't just love you," Josiah said. "I respect you. I owe you everything." Maria smiled through tears. "You gave me a name when the world wanted to forget mine, and I'll never stop choosing you." They kissed. The guests cheered. The press got nothing, and they preferred it that way. Weeks later, the foundation launched its first center in Surulere. The banner read, "She hadn't wanted her name on it," Josiah insisted. He stood at the podium that day, holding her hand. "To everyone who thought this story was about revenge," he said, "you were wrong. It was about rediscovery of truth, of character, and of love." Applause thundered. And Maria, once the nameless maid, became a national symbol of quiet strength. One evening, they walked barefoot through the garden she planted herself. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I'm free," she replied. "That's more than happiness. That's peace." He kissed her forehead. The wind whispered through the trees. The past had burned, but the future was blooming together.